everybody. Welcome to DnDTime Worlds. I believe that we are live and all is good. Yeah, I'm excited to hop into another classic episode. I think it's going to be a fun one tonight. I see Vassasate Jew hanging out with the Boop evening. Good evening to you as well. And Bionic Shiba, I had to eat, but I am here. Hello, Pete. Shiba, hello to you. And I'm glad you're filling up your belly. That's very important. Carsan64, sup everyone. Sup to you. How's it going, yo? I'm excited, like I said, to talk about some world building stuff tonight. As you all know, but for I believe you all know, but for anyone who is unfamiliar, here on DnDTime Worlds, we build modular Dungeons and Dragons content. Not in particularly, home-brewing things, and tonight's topic, I think sounds a little bit more mechanical than I intend to make it, because today we're going to be crafting one or two dungeons, but we're not going to be going through and, doing things like statting out monsters, just kind of, doing some, rough plans of layouts, but more building the history of the dungeons and kind of, what stories you can tell in a dungeon that you can just kind of place anywhere in a world. Dungeons that, like everything we try and create in this kind of Season 2 of DnDTime Worlds, dungeons that you can just kind of plop down into the middle of any campaign. And I think that's going to be very fun to do. And I think I have a few kind of basic criteria to get us kind of thinking and start using the creative aspects of our brains, and some simple questions that I think are going to define what we do in a dungeon are, it's going to be defined by the creatures that we choose to have reside within it. What type of dungeon it is. Is it a ruin, a temple? Is it just like a cave system? Is it somewhere, what region is it in? Is it in the Underdark, the Overdark? Is it in, an extraplanar region that we end up kind of deciding on? And maybe we want to make it not something that's plane specific, because we are trying to create a dungeon that could just kind of go anywhere. But maybe, it's something that can be put in a mountain, and I think it's fair to say that most games will have a mountain, so we can make it specific in that regard. But I don't know if we want to go so specific as to this dungeon only works on Mechanus, as there's probably not going to be a lot of adventuring parties that find themselves in Mechanus without the dungeon master kind of pushing them in that direction. But region, I think, is definitely something that's important to have in mind. We have another great thing to talk about, and this is something I definitely want to focus on, is what is the purpose of the dungeon? Why was it created? Why is it here? What is the dungeon's history? Has it always been what it is now? I see Demon Lord Nem has arrived upon the scene. Nemi, good to see you tonight. Walks out of the shadows, walking on 8 metal spiked spider legs. Terrifying. These are the kind of things that we're going to be putting in our dungeons. Our demon lords walking on 8 metal spiked spider legs. Another good question is, why would anyone want to go into this dungeon? Why would a party have reason? Are there treasures within it? Is there important information within it? Is there an evil that could seep outwards and into the world? The flannel pug, good day and goodbye. Flannel pug, you've only just arrived. It's so sad to see you leave so soon. But flannel pug, go forth and do what it is that you have to do. It is good to see you for the short time, if that is all that you could be. And then the last, and maybe this is the most important thing, is why is this dungeon going to be fun? What about it is memorable? What about it is going to make your players, really want to explore this dungeon? I say we make a strange offhand dungeon that exists within a bag of holding that somebody can fall into, or a man-eating bag of devouring. Also, Blood Deuce is here. Hello, Blood Deuce. It is good to see you this evening as well. The flannel pug has ninja'd out. Gone with the shadows. Just the very same shadows through which Demon Lord Nemi entered. The flannel pug has stepped out through. I want to turn everything to ashes. Well, we'll turn the players to ashes when they walk through this brutal dungeon that we end up making together. And I have one question that I have prepared via straw poll for y'all. What if we made a dungeon that was a storage site for resources for other dungeons? I don't want to do anything too meta, even though I do love both of those ideas. Those are both very Those are both very fun. Dungeon that is made from the corpse of a ginormous creature. I mean, this is something that could also definitely be done. I think all these things are doable. And to kind of get us going in a direction and kind of push us down a path, I have a poll for you guys. One, because I love polls and I enjoy voting in them. And this poll is a list of creature types. I've picked out 10 creature types that I think are appropriate. I already voted in the poll. I voted for all of them. So that didn't really help, but I didn't end up narrowing it down with that. That vote of 1 for each of the 10. But I picked out 10 kind of categories to start giving us some ideas to spring off of, rather than just floating around in the void with infinite possibility, which sometimes it's nice to be in a land of infinite possibility, but for the sake of time, I think having a good starting off point like this will be good. So I recommend voting in that poll and letting us know what you're interested in, but to rattle them off, I didn't do every single category of monsters, because there's some that we've done recently, or that I've done recently that I just wasn't too into, but I picked aberrations. Aberrations is an easy one. We could do tons of stuff with those. Beasts might be a tricky one, but it might be interesting. And just for anyone who's unfamiliar with any of these types of monsters, I'll just also say a little bit about what they are. Aberrations, if we're talking that, we're talking, Lovecraftian monsters. We're talking your beholders, terrible tentacled creatures. Beasts, natural creatures like wolves and dogs and elephants and all kinds of stuff like that. Constructs, artificial creations of life, your robots of the world, which I think also that's a fun dungeon. That's a very kind of, maybe that one's a little campaign specific, because I don't know if every campaign features a lot of constructs, be they in the form of, powerful golems, or in the form of, more mechanical, like robots and automatons, things like that. But that could be a very cool one. Dragons, a dragon in a dungeon, that's the name of the game right there. In figuratively and literally. Elementals, there's a million elemental dungeons. The Temple of Elemental Evil. When I think of dungeons, I, for some reason, think of elemental first, just because of elemental evil. But that's well-tread ground, and we can make our own mark there, if that is your wishes. The Fae. The Fae are my personal favorite class of monsters, and I'm sure there's a lot of cool stuff we can do if we end up choosing that direction. Fiends. I know that Demon Lord Nem is going to be voting on that Fiends track. I'm looking at Blood Deuce's comment now. Fun fact. Kobolds are listed as dragons. Because of this, I'm holding everyone here at Shiv Point until they vote for dragons. If dragons don't win, I'm throwing this jar of wasps. And if you'll notice, Blooddews bringing up kobolds. Kobolds are they really listed as dragons? I would have sworn that they were under humanoids. Are you certain, Blooddews? I commend thee and the collective chat to look it up and see if see if it is true, because I thought they were humanoids, and I intentionally didn't include humanoids on the list because I figure no matter what we create, we're gonna end up throwing in some appropriate humanoids. Also, we recently did a very big, spent a lot of time building up kind of a Knoll villain, so I thought stepping away from humanoids would be fun. But I think even if we aren't focusing around humanoids, like not building for example, a goblin dungeon, we'll still end up putting in some humanoids into it at some point, because those are the most fun creatures to interact with a lot of time, because they're sentient and you can maybe communicate with them, and that makes a lot more drama. This is aside the point, though. So we talked Fae, we talked Fiends, monstrosities. I don't know what a monstrosity-based dungeon is. For anyone who's unfamiliar with what a monstrosity is, it's sort of a creature of heightened nature, in a sense. It is a creature that is monstrous. A lot of the classical creatures of mythology are monstrosities. Things like hydras and sphinxes and medusae, I think is the plural of medusas. Medusas feels dumb to me. Medusae. I don't know. let's see. Then I also put in plants. I don't know. I think a nature-based dungeon could be very cool. That was one that also personally was like striking off some inspiration bubbles in my own head. And undead. Undead. I mean, it's the most. It is the most classic dungeon. Banakshiba says Gorgons. You know, you'd think Gorgons, but in the context of D&D, Gorgons are a completely different creature, where Gorgons are metallic bulls that also turn things to stone, I think, which it's weird that kind of got carried over, but they are officially listed in the monster manual, Medusa, as kind of a lowercase m. Medusa is not the proper name of one Gorgon. Medusa is the general name for all Gorgons, which is a very weird choice that they made, which I don't know if... I've never gotten used to it. I've been complaining about it since the Monster Manual came out, and I probably will until the day I die. Carson, the site I visited listed them as humanoids. Oh, wait, Bloodduce just saying, yeah, they actually are humanoids. I just wish they were dragons. Yeah, I agree. I'm definitely with you. Binakshiba, I agree with your lack of agreement with that statement. I think, unless you're not agreeing with my disagreement, in which case I don't agree with you. These are getting into some complicated linguistics. So just going to post it one more time, and then give it a couple more minutes, and then we'll take a look at our results. And we will build a dungeon based around whatever the top... whatever the kind of top answer is. You mean Gorgon, Pete? I've lost track of where we're at on the Gorgon Medusa topic, so I don't know what that means. Yeah, give it a couple more minutes, and we'll see what y'all think. I don't know what I'm pulling for. I don't know. I think any of these would be exciting. I didn't include oozes and giants as well, because I think an ooze dungeon, it's just going to come down to us making a dungeon with the one cool ooze, which I can't remember the name of at the moment. The Ublex, is that what it is? The Oblex? Because that's the only cool ooze that really feels worthy as being like a dungeon sort of... the main monster of a dungeon. I almost said a dungeon master. And I guess an Oblex would make a great dungeon master. They can play a lot of roles simultaneously. And giants, I just did a dungeon with a bunch of giants, so I just didn't feel like it. So, that's my own preference there. Hey, Pete! You put a question mark at the end, Max. Hi, Max! Where's this poll? I just linked it. Also, if you look in the discussion thread on Discord, under the world discussion thread, it is also there. It's higher up in chat, and I'll just for you right now link it one more time anyway. Carsen64, I'm now imagining an Ublex behind a DM screen rolling dice. That is a great mental image. It could roll all of its dice simultaneously from different tentacled slimy hands. Tendrils is probably a better word for it. I'm excited to see. I can't decide. Like, I don't know. Fiends is going to be a tricky one if we end up going the Fiend direction, because Fiends are gonna... I don't know. Like I said, I just think that'll be a hard one to make while making it general, but it could be really interesting. Undead. I mean, undead. There's so much room in that territory. It has been done countless times, and I've never gone into an undead dungeon where it was a strange, where it wasn't kind of unique. Trust a Flow. Can we make a religious zealot humanoid dungeon? Jeremy, welcome. Also, I intentionally didn't put humanoids on there because we've done humanoids kind of before in the most recent kind of enemies we're doing, where we did our humanoid kind of null villain. And also, I figure whatever thing that we do for our dungeon, be it aberrations, dragons, fae, whatever, I think there are definitely going to be some humanoids that end up getting mixed in. Like, if there are dragons, odds are we're going to probably be putting some kobolds or someone that worships the dragon in the dungeon, so on, so forth. And there's maybe it's a cult of elemental worshippers, and there's a sect for each of the core elements. So really it's a sex... Oh, nice. Really, it's a sex dungeon. Pretty good, Jeremy. You got me to go close enough to say it that I figured I'd just give it to you. what about a hybrid of these options? Example, elemental constructs, little IDK. Well, Max, more than a hybrid, I think we're going to end up having time to do a couple of these. So we might just end up doing 2. And it's 9:15 now, so we are finally going to take a look and kind of see where we are at. Ooh, all right. It's looking like we are going with constructs. That's a spicy one. You guys picked one of the more out there ones. Not a surprise, I suppose. I didn't put celestials on here. Maybe I should have put celestials on the list, but we have our choice, and we are going to go the like you were saying, the mad scientist dungeon route. And that doesn't necessarily have to be it, and also it could very be it. So it looks like we're going constructs, and then if we have time for a second dungeon, it looks like we'll be doing something with the Fae. Although, as we're going through, we have received another vote for constructs in the short time that has passed, cementing their lead even further. Heimerdinger's the boss confirmed. We will have to wait and see what we end up coming up with. That's funny though. So, without further ado, let's start building our dungeon. And we're going to be building the dungeon under the kind of mindset that we want the dungeon to feature constructs prominently, and for them to be the kind of the major antagonists of the dungeon, one way or another. So, what kinds of creatures are we talking? We have decided on this definitely and absolutely. Constructs. And then we'll come back. Maybe we'll name this dungeon at some point. Tomb of the Mad Automaton. Tomb of the Automaton. This feels very good to say. And, oh man, now that actually, I was joking, but what would an automaton tomb be like? Because I assume most constructs don't die, so a tomb dedicated to a construct is very odd, and has a story behind it. So maybe there's something there. We'll come back to it. Now, my next question for all of you is, what kind of dungeon do we want to make? I see some great ideas already kind of popping off in chat. But actually was saying when constructs become sentient and decide they don't want to be slaves. What are elementals again? Sentient elemental creatures, right? Sebrak asks, yes, elementals are not necessarily sentient, but they are beings made of elements. So there are some sentient elementals, but I think the most quintessential, like genies, for example, are considered elementals because it's basically any creature that is a living embodiment of some element. I think a lot of them are magical constructions. For example, your fire elemental, or your water elemental, earth, and air elemental are the 4 basic ones in the monster manual. Those things are just kind of creatures of bounded elements created by wizards. And they are barely sentient. They mostly just kind of follow orders, but, they're elements bounded. Demon Lord Den asks, what one? We're going constructs. What if the dungeon was a clock tower? I really like that idea. Clock tower. I like it enough to almost want to... And Farfel, also, welcome to the chat. Max Puncher says, yeah, no, Max, I'm feeling it. Clock tower is an evil artificer's lair. Why just a clock tower? Why not a clock castle? Well, it could be, or maybe the clock tower is big enough that it is almost a castle into itself. Sebrak, a rock elemental named Pebbles, who has a bag of sharp pebbles he throws at enemies. I like that it's like this huge... I like that Pebbles is this huge towering earth elemental who just chucks rocks at people. Sebrak, and he could probably do a lot more damage by just punching, but no, he just throws jagged rocks at people. Where on top of the clock tower lies the source of madness, where the clock would be. Oh yeah, you know that if we're doing a clock tower dungeon, then the final chamber is just the huge, intricate inner workings and gears of the clock that are all, moving, and I like this enough that I think this is the direction that we're going. And on the subject of humanoids, if we're talking a clock tower as our dungeon setting, and we're talking constructs as our creatures, I think that, one, that vibe is awesome, and two, I think the kinds of creatures that we're going to be talking are going to be very clockworky. Like, I don't know if we're going to be necessarily putting a lot of things like stone golems and iron golems in a clock tower. I feel like modrons, even if they're reflavored, so they're not necessarily just straight up modrons, but that kind of aesthetic where they're very spindly and small and seem to be really intricate in their design. Creatures like that feel very right to me for like the clock tower dungeon aesthetic. And I'm really into this vibe. So we're going full Castlevania on this. I've actually never played a Castlevania game, save the first like 1 or 2 levels of the first game. And Farfel, while they wait, they have to deal with the ticking, just a constant ticking throughout the whole place. The Cog Boys from Vassal Zeju. Hey, we're the Cog Boys. Yeah, the Cog Boys. The Leggy Boys, the automaton Leggy Boys, the robot Leggy Boys. Oh god, if the Leggy Boys from DnDTime were ever robot, we're the Leggy Boys. Yeah, the Leggy Boys. Bionic Sheba says the clock tower isn't controlled by gears and engines, it's controlled by individual small creatures manually moving the hands. I'm very into that vibe. I want to make it like a little bit of a combination, because if it's completely creatures, then I feel like we lose out on a lot of potential for some really cool traps we can make with like huge swinging like picture the inside. For any of you who have played Super Mario 64, which I'm not going to get too much on a pedestal on my soapbox here, but Super Mario 64 could be the best game ever made. But any of you who've ever played Super Mario 64, Tick-Tock Clock, the inside of the giant clock, is such a cool level, where there are all sorts of, like, you know, winding hands inside of it that kind of move, and that make platforms for Mario to have to jump over, and all, like, the internal gears and mechanisms make really cool platforming challenges. I think there are ways to create puzzles and skill challenges by, like, having to navigate the inner workings of a giant clock. Here's some kind of puzzle that can only be solved at the strike of midnight and noon. Yeah, see, that's... Shiva, you're now on the same page as me. That is the exact kind of thing that I'm talking about, and I think that's such a cool aesthetic. Okay, so I'm sold. We've decided on Clock Tower. What type of dungeon? A clock tower. And what region is it located in? I mean, you can put a clock tower anywhere, but most likely... the clock tower is probably in an urban setting. And just as the clock tower makes the most sense and works the best, so to speak, and I say best in big quotes, as there's no right or wrong way to do something like this, works the best in an urban setting, I can see just the same, just like a lone clock tower in the desert being an incredibly, like, surreal and cool, almost that, I did a entire adventure on this in DnDTime once, and I cannot remember the Salvador Dali painting. I believe it's The Persistence of Memory, where it has all like those like clocks that are like dripping over sideways. A clock tower in the desert could also very much invoke that sort of surreal feeling. So I think that the clock tower, while it has one setting where it really thrives, which would be a city setting where you'd be most likely to find one, I think you can actually put that anywhere, and it would just change the vibe and still be really cool. So I think that's just a great like type of building. It's also pretty unique. I have never played in a clock tower dungeon before. I've run clock towers before, but it's always just kind of skipped to the final encounter where they get to the top of the clock tower and they fight within, like, you know, the clock chamber, which I think is where we're going to go eventually, because that's... You know, that's the juice, that's the payoff of all of this. Let's see. Okay, region, some rustic town full of greed and deception and full of technology. Greed and deception, I like, says Demon Lord Nem. Yeah, so let's get into the clock tower's purpose and history. So this is where we're going to be talking really about... What is the story of what is the story of this clock tower? Like, what is the theme? What kind of, what is the dungeon like? Why would players go here? What is the real juice of this kind of, the real meat of this dungeon? So Sebrak has an idea here. There's an insane old man at the top of the tower who calls himself Father Time, and for beating his tower, he gives you an enchanted stopwatch that gives you an extra bonus action once per fight before a rest is needed. I definitely like that idea a lot. I think there are aspects of that. Like, I don't know if I necessarily want to do, like, I don't know if I want to go the vibe where he's just, like, waiting for people to challenge his tower like a Pokemon master. Being like, if you can beat the challenges within, I shall reward you with a... which, maybe that is a fun... Actually, maybe that is a fun angle to go. I don't know what you guys think, but I think, like, an old man at the top of his tower that thinks he's, like, Father Time, and it's, like, by running the clock, like, I have created time with my clock. Like, maybe he invented clocks in the setting or something like that, so he thinks, like, he owns time, and to an extent, he invented time because it is a construct. Vashel Zeiji says, I like the idea of a crazy time wizard. Farfel says, is there going to be a humanoid in this dungeon? What if a demon corrupted the constructs instead? Blood Deuce likes the idea of a goofy fake Father Time. I think a humanoid kind of wizard being behind a lot of the problems here. Maybe an Artificer character, because we've just talked a ton about the Artificer. We won't stat him out, but I think having a goofy kind of wizard, eccentric, crazy wizard, feels very right for this vibe, and we could go a little bit more wild with it. Like, I saw Farfel was recommending having, like, some undead or a demon having, like, corrupted things within the space. And I think that could be a cool story, but sometimes I like to have a dungeon that just... it is kind of what you expect. And when you go into a clock tower and there's a bunch of weird clockwork creatures, you kind of expect at the end of it there's going to be some mad old person who has created all of these, not even necessarily old, just some mad individual, mad inventor who created all of these constructs. And I think Father Time being the master of this dungeon, and maybe he's not in particularly strong, maybe he's kind of a weak wizard, and the master is his, like, greatest construct or his swarm of constructs or whatever. Maybe they some kind of, maybe, you know, Voltron of Modrons is at the top. I don't know. I don't know what it will end up being, but I think we go in with the clock tower is run by Father Time. And I also, and this is the first name request I'll make of the day, and I'm certain not the last. What do we want to name Father Time? Father Time is what he calls himself, and I think that's what the constructs refer to him as, but I think everyone in the town or the region surrounding are gonna know him as something different. Oh, that's Fred. Yeah, he lost it quite a long time ago. And now the clock's not running, which is bad. And this also is going to tie into... this is also going to tie into why why someone would encounter it. What would be the quest hook to go into this tower? I mean, some towers, if you're just putting it in the middle of nowhere, I think that's a very much, like, explore it because it's there, and just seeing a clock tower in the middle of nowhere would be enough to entice a lot of players to kind of just go into it. But I think it's also good to have a hook and a reason. So, like, I think just a flat one, and we can have a million of these. These are something that there can be no end to. And I'll catch up in chat. I see that chat has gotten very much ahead of me, so we will come back to that. So I would encounter a party encounter it. Perhaps a party might encounter it because of a whole bunch of reasons. A party may encounter it because the clock tower continues to chime out without end, annoying townsfolk. Official requests from law enforcement for the noise to cease were responded to with hostilities. So it's just really annoying. This person thinks he's gained some kind of mastery over time in his clockwork tower, and has just kind of been bothering the locals, and they're like, all right, well, this has gone on long enough. They called the guard, and then the guard just, like, opened the door, and 1,000 Modrons poured out and, like, beat him up, and then retreated back into the tower, and now he's just kind of held up within his little zone. So let me look back at some of the stuff in chat here. What if the crazy fake Father Time is an ally in the dungeon who helps you beat the boss? I mean, maybe. That could be very cool. Sorko here. Of course I invented time. That's its name. Anymore, if it's the juice at the top, make a moral decision. Some kind... so you ask, is the juice worth the squeeze? What are they willing to pay for the reward? I think that is absolutely an interesting tale. Maybe the moral question is, and we can come back to this, but let's talk a little bit of morality, because I think we've established that this person is crazy. I think we make him crazy in such a way where it's sympathetic. I think a great way to do that, the clock tower, and I'm going to throw out a character idea here, and when I catch up in chat, I'll see what you guys think of it, I assume. We've decided that it's run by this guy, Father Time. But it's actually run by the most intelligent construct that he's created. And then you have a very interesting dynamic, which that instantly creates a mortal gray area. Because now imagine the situation where Father Time has completely lost his marbles a long time ago, and he's created something that's very intelligent that's now kind of manipulating him and having him create more things and act in different ways, putting him up on a pedestal. So this person, he's kind of harmless, and he's being manipulated into doing some bad things, but he's necessary to stop in order to stop the robots. Like, we create some kind of gate where defeating the only way to defeat these robots is to in some way down Father Time. But in doing so, does that right? Because this guy's just being used against his will. And that would be that kind of moral conundrum if we want to go that route. And like I said, we'll catch up. So other stuff, and I'm just going to start jotting some stuff down. Yeah, humans go crazy. Oh yeah. Magical aging, time dilation, what could happen when stepped in on such a force. Okay, those are other ideas. Yep. Magical... aging and time dilation are things we can play with here. I don't like the time theme. I like the Mad Inventor idea, but Father Time sounds meh. Like there's no reason behind it. I like the Father Time thing as just someone who just, because he lives in the clock, he thinks he controls time. I don't know if it's necessarily... I don't know if it's necessarily someone who has, like, control over time, but more just, like, someone who thinks they do, which I think is cool for the Inventor theme. The clock itself is alive, says Sheba. That's an idea, and we'll throw it on. But that'll also satisfy, I think it was Vassal's Age Hughes, the dungeon is a monster itch. Clock tower is sentient unto itself. Interesting, and could be dope as hell. At the top, stupid emoji autofill. Okay, yeah, I'm with ya. Seabrack, maybe he's an old wizard who through studying time magic went insane, but elements to safeguard a time machine that he thinks he created. Yeah, and maybe that's what he thinks he's doing. I like the idea of, like, that's what he's working towards in the clock towers. He thinks he's making a time machine. That could be... thinks that the clock tower will give him control over time. Augra from Dark Crystal. I'm unfamiliar with the reference. Farple says, Jim Howard. No simple names. Bobby Clocksmith. Crazy Jim. The clock itself can distort time and speed up, trapping Father Time in the clock for years alone to drive him mad. Seabrack, Martin Brown. I love it. I love Martin Brown. That's what the name of this guy is. It has been decreed by me now, Martin Brown. would be the name of this character for sure. But he actually has no control over time. Name is Pass the Time. That's not bad. Marty Brown, Matt. Back to the Future reference, yes. Passing time, take a pass. Alright, more names. Dave Cogstrider, who calls himself Father Time. I don't know, I'm really feeling Martin Brown. I like that Back to the Future joke. Back to the Future reference. King Rudolph, King being his first name, not a time. Well, title, oh shit, I really like that too. King Rudolph. I don't know if that's a reference to something, because it sounds like it might be, but King as a first name is actually very cool. I kind of like that aesthetic. Tower itself can disappear and reappear every hour on the hour. That seems maybe extreme. I don't know. Maybe we can fit that in. We'll have to wait and see. Hadner Fallen. King Cog for the Kong King Cog. That's pretty good. Hadner Fallen. Reflected 10-8. Oh, dang, am I late? No, Reflected. You're never late. You're always on time. Whenever you arrive is the perfect time for you to come. Welcome. And welcome to you, Hadner Fallen. So, the Artificer has plans to fully automate the town and make everything boring and dictatorial. Yeah, that could definitely be. And I like the idea of this, like, secondary construct. For the record, I've met a man named King Rudolph. That's just such a great name. Both of those are really good. Dave Cogstrider is also referenced to something that I don't know. Oh, Seabrack, that's very sad. He went to the tower and tried to learn how to turn back time to save his wife who died in childbirth. He slowly went mad from sadness. Oh, man. Oh, no. Why humans go crazy when they lose their loved ones. The clock is the heart. This is what the clockwork tries to manipulate him into. They've messed with the blueprints to build other functionality than the time machine intended. Yeah, I think that is... I think that's an awesome direction for this to go. Martin King Brown. I mean, perhaps. All right, I've caught up on chat. we're back up to date. You guys are absolutely killing it there for a huge chunk. So... I really like this direction that we're starting to get into. And I think that the direction that I'm really feeling is that one. He needs corrupted constructs based on his late wife and unborn child. You see, I like that backstory, but I think the problem with having a backstory like that, where you can't, like, visually see it, I think those are stories that are very hard to convey with a dungeon, without explicitly telling the players via more kind of... not meta, but very obvious kind of exposition points. Things like he finds journal entries. And there's, like, slightly more subtle and simple ways. I mean, you know, pictures. You can do things like, oh, there's a picture in this chamber of this guy younger with his family. And then further in, there's, like, the graves of his family, like the bodies of his family in, like, a room that is essentially a miniature tomb. And there are absolutely ways that we can do that, but I think that's hard to convey in a way that feels natural without having, like, a lot of story fleshed out and built around this. We want to make something that you can, like, jump in, plug and play, so to speak. Jump in and just get going on. And I think the story of a... you know, the guy who runs the clock and built all these little... You know, he built the clock. He made a lot of intricate little robots and stuff to allow it to run and function on the scale that it does. And then kind of with time and just confusion and, like I said, maybe he made a sentient construction that's kind of, like, messing him up a little bit. He has... just slowly lost control. I think just a loss of sanity from just being too engrossed in his work is a lot easier to convey over the course of one simple dungeon. The construct was in the image of his wife, though devoid of actual feeling. Yeah, I mean, that's something I think we could absolutely pull off. having the construct just maybe be like a surrogate for someone that is in his family, a surrogate mentor, a surrogate wife, a surrogate child. And I think that particular piece of story is something that you could just juxtapose in. I think that would be easy to kind of get into without going too far off point. Madman will be portrayed by Anthony Hopkins. I like it. Matty Mortz. An excellent mechanic for this dungeon would be to give each player X tokens, like inspiration will grant advantage. However, these ones can be used after the roll. When used, you as the DM collect the tokens in an empty goblet. During the final fight, you as the DM can use the tokens against the players. The time equals out and makes the combat or situation more challenging, as well as telling a story for the nature of time. That is absolutely very cool. That's a really cool mechanic. I think that's something that we could totally do something with. We have Max Meister here with, I prefer an evil person who plans to take over the town with his ever-growing array of constructs. I think we're trying to fit too many things in. So I'm going to start making a few different things that we're going to decide on right here. I don't know. We're not going to decide on either of these names. But we are going to decide that he's either Martin Brown or King Rudolph. Actual name of this individual is Martin Brown or King, first name Rudolph. Over time, and there's a couple ideas around here. I'm gonna go with just that he lost insanity, but if you wanted to go like the more kind of went mad and is trying to turn back time in order to like save family direction, you could, but I'm gonna go with just a more direct lost his sanity by being engrossed in his work, created a construct that was sentient and intelligent. Said construct has been manipulating Martin since its creation. Martin believes that his clock, once modifications on it are finished, will give him complete mastery over time. And I don't know how deep we want to go into giving him time powers, and I think that changes the tone in a major way. But for now, I'm going to say perhaps he has some simple time-based abilities, and the constructs therein have made minor successes, but the primary antagonist construct has knows that Martin's end goal is impossible. And I think that's a pretty good, a pretty fair tone to set for this. And that's going to be the idea, and that's a story that I think can be conveyed very simply just by entering, like when they enter all of the simple constructs at a base level. And here is one of the great things about constructs, by the way. Everything is a construct. So when we're talking a little bit about the types of creatures within, everything is a construct. So if we want him to have like robot dogs and robot birds and metalwork, I don't know, metalwork elephants even. I don't know if we're going to go anything at that scale, because I'm picturing a lot of little things rather than big things, because clockwork, I think intricate and small. I think for one thing, absolutely contains Modrons. I think Modrons are the perfect... I think Modrons are the absolute perfect thing for this. They, like, have the exact look that I'm expecting in my brain for what the inner workings of... the inner workings of a clock would be like. You know, those very small, spindly arms and things. And I'm going to put a note here. Can use Modron stat block and flavor without necessarily tying them lore-wise to Mechanus. So Modrons have a very strong association with Mechanus, which is the plane of order, and there is a powerful... there is a very powerful demigod, like, elder being, eldritch being named Mechanus there, who is like the all-controlling and creator of the Modrons that runs Mechanus perfectly. And we don't have to, like, associate with them. We can just use Modrons and have all the cool little things that those can do, and take those, like, things like axiomatic minds, where little ones are, like, stuck on one task. All of those things are fun and can be used without having to tie them in like that, which is great. Reflected tonight, there should be a lair action that allows him to cast Time Stop for 1 round, 1 per year. Just enough to spook the party. Well, I really like the idea, and I'm going to... Father Time. Because let's start talking about some of the creatures within. Father Time. I'm going to throw out the idea that Father Time casts Time Stop at will. Now, I know you're looking at that and thinking, Father Time casts Time Stop at will. He's just gained absolute control over the inside of his clock tower. Now, another thing about Father Time is a level 3 to 5 wizard. Now, he's learned one very good spell, but he's not a very good wizard on the whole. So he can't actually do a lot with that Time Stop, except cast Time Stop and then walk over to another kind of part of the room and do some minor activity, and like maybe do some lair actions within the clock. And the idea of him just kind of seeming to be everywhere as he just kind of like appears in different places around the clock, like, I think that's a very cool aesthetic. And this is, I'm going to put a big aesthetic here, because I think there was a big divide on whether or not we were going to go the time, if we go the time control route. Because I don't know how much, we haven't really talked much about where the time thing factors in, because there's definitely a dichotomy between the between the time changing and him just being kind of like an inventor type character, and I don't know if those two things meld. Whoa, that was not what I wanted to do. I just wanted to do that. There we go. Between the time meld thing, so we'll put it down as a possibility, but I think that could be a very cool mechanic for this type of guy. But I also want to start brainstorming some other just stuff that we can put in this dungeon. Boop. Why can't I go back? It won't let me... Oh, that's very weird. That's busted for some reason. Huh. My sheet is messed up. Oh well, I am not going to sweat it any further. If we don't. So we just have another second there for if we don't. All right, so let's see what's going on in chat, because I missed some chat again. Max Meister says the layout of the dungeon constantly changes moving platforms. Yep, absolutely, I agree. A clock tower, its layout is constantly changing because of the intricate inner workings of the giant clock layer. Clock as it is right now can cast Time Stop once per month and nowhere near its finish. Patchwork98, also welcome. Reflected 10-8, slow and haste at will, however they affect both him, the constructs, and the party. Varful is a Mechanus Eldritch. I thought Eldritch implied sinister or spooky, and Blood Deuce Eldritch is more along the lines of difficult or impossible to fully comprehend. I think so. I believe that Blood Deuce is right, and that's how I always thought of it. Time stop repeatedly until short rest is done. I think that's also a cool way to do it. I think there are a lot of ways we can do that. Father Time should be the mini-boss. If he's a low level, the antagonist construct should be the big boss. You see, I love the idea of both of them being the boss, like fighting them together, because then there's their interactions. And Father Time, like, whenever you get the impression that this guy's just a crazy old man, but whenever you attack the construct, just, why are you hurting my baby boy? Pointing up at, like, the evil construct that you know is terrible. And then there's that kind of like, oh no, we don't want to. So I think doing them both at the same time would be very cool. Feywild time distortion for when they leave. When players leave this dungeon, they are subjected to the time distortion as per the rules set out for the Feywild in the DMG, the Dungeon Master's Guide. He experimented with casting Time Stop during a time stop. That's when he lost his sanity. I think that would do that to you, Hadnerfalm. And I think we've really started to move in the direction of him being very heavy in the time category. So I want to go back and grab that mechanic from Matty Morgs, because I thought that was really cool, and we'll just copy and paste that right in. Father Time, what type of dungeon? So we can just have this as just a general mechanic for the dungeon. And then get the rest. Actually, I think there's two more section. And then I think I've got one more old one here. Yeah, excellent. And I think we can just copy and paste that right in, because Maddie did a great job of outlining it there. Oh no, I messed it up that time. There we go. I really like that whole idea. All right. Patrick 98 was inspired to make the clock after seeing the ruins of a clock-like wizard tower and tales of an inventor who could control time. The inventor is actually him, having been displaced through time after his plans are foiled. That is pretty wild. I like that. Big boss antagonist construct whose lair actions include summoning a ton of constructs as well as slow on the party and haste on constructs. Seabrack, did you miss my previous comment? I may have, if you want to post it again. Every time the Father Time casts a time spell, he has to roll a saving throw. If he fails, he'll accidentally target the construct. I don't know if we want to make it hurt the construct. Because let's talk a little bit, because we've got a lot about Father Time now, and I think we're really starting to get a good picture of this guy. But also, since this is a dungeon, we want to flesh out what the rest of the dungeon is like as well. So this is kind of the final chamber. This is kind of final chamber and final chamber and just generally like that kind of stuff. Doop. Boop. It implies these are kind of like mechanics to use for the last area and what the final boss is going to be like. But what other stuff would go in a clock tower? I think for one thing, and we're just going to get a category going up here called Other Rooms, and under that, the first one I'm going to put out here is a factory. The primary area in which constructs are created, and then what are the interaction points within the factory? Simple, small automatons are being created at reasonable intervals. And using molds and blueprints. Potential for players to interrupt the creation process by changing the molds or jamming the clockworks in some way, making the final battle, I say quote unquote easier, because it's not going to be easier, but you're going to give the illusion if they do that it was easier, and like you're going to have, if they did that, a bunch of like busted clockwork things be summoned by the guy, and maybe, you do that anyway, and you don't want the final battle to ever feel underwhelming because of something they did earlier, but the feeling that it would have been overwhelming and not is great. So I love the idea of, like, they've basically, like, taken the mold that they have, like, the model clockwork automaton, and the players could, in theory, like, take the legs and put them where the hands are and vice versa. So they just summon, like, useless, like, hobbling little clockwork robots. And that's, like, a really fun thing that they would have the opportunity to interact with. And, guarded by simple automatons. What other kinds of creatures? So modrons. Modrons refer to their master as Father Time. And this is just how the modrons and the... I'm saying modrons, but these are any automatons we create, and we can turn anything into an automaton by just describing it differently. Like if a wolf is an automaton, it's just like you say, oh, it looks like a wolf, but its skin is made of metal and intricate clockwork. And then you just give it, like, maybe a damage resistance that a wolf wouldn't, like a resistance to, like, non-magical simple damage, like bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, and you're good. You're as good to go. Guarded by simple automatons. So I see some other ideas. Bionic Sheba says a giant pendulum somewhere. Yep, absolutely. Pendulum. In the foyer. Actually, we're just going to call this the foyer. So we got the factory, the foyer. the first area that the players enter into in the clock tower. The huge tower houses a massive pendulum that swings through this room. Oh, Control Z. The pendulum acts as an obstacle that crosses their path and threatens to strike players as they begin to climb upwards, or is a very difficult ladder leading up. One way or another, the players will interact with the pendulum in some way, where it's a trap where the pendulum swings back and forth and they have to like time like a jump or some other thing to avoid getting struck by the pendulum, or kind of in the opposite sense, maybe they have to actually climb up the big swinging thing, and they have to find some way to like get onto the pendulum while it's moving. And I think using the pendulum as kind of a swing to like cross and jump across the chamber, a chamber could be very cool. There's a path like leading across where you have to like jump onto the pendulum, ride it to the other side, and then jump off onto another platform. I think either way, the pendulum, did we get it? How do we spell pendulum? I don't know how to, pendulum. Okay, I thought I was spelling it that way, but the pendulum is a great skill challenge and simple puzzle opportunity. Later on, using the pendulum, if there's like a fight in this space, monsters using the pendulum as, you know, basically dragging players into like the giant swinging thing and like hitting them with it, or vice versa, the players using that tactic against monsters, both of those are interesting and make a very dynamic fight. Let's see what else we got going on here. Possible hazards, malfunctioning constructs, giant gears, swinging pendulums, pressurized steam / small fires, sudden wire explosion with tension is too high somewhere. Patchwork 98, all excellent. I'm going to throw these just in a list of the kind of things that you can put in right under the main section here, because those are all wonderful. Sword Co here mentions bells. Yeah, the chimes, that's going to be huge. And I like the idea before they get to like the clock room, they get even higher above the clock room to like the bell section where there's all these intricate chimes, and then they like are dropping down through the clockworks in terms of like the standard path of the dungeon. Having that at least as an option for the path, I think that could be a really engaging thing. So I'm going to say the bell tower. Because I think the bells are, like, above. Like, there's the clock tower, and then there's, like, an opening at the top where, like, the chimes and stuff are not, like, in the opening behind the clock, necessarily. Chimes section of the tower above the final clock chamber. Excellent stuff. Potential stealth issues in accidentally sounding the bells. That could be very, like, a very interesting idea that you could very simply put in, I think. Some ideas. Reflected tonight, we need the conveyor belt skill gauntlet. Yeah, conveyor belt skill gauntlet. We're going to throw that in the factory because that's just where it feels right. Oh. Boop. That's a classic. You can't forget the conveyor belt skill gauntlet. That's a very succinct way of putting that, where I've played that so many times in video games where I knew exactly what it was that you were talking about. Hadnerfallen says, the kitchen has a very impressive spice rack, like wall-sized. Every jar and tin is filled with thyme, meticulously sorted by when it was picked and dried, but it is sorted by days ago rather than dates, so some poor Modron reorganizes all of them every day. Sure, time might be unrelated to time, but King isn't taking any chances. I actually really like that. Even he knows that that's a little bit crazy, but he's not willing to give it up. I'm just copying and pasting that and putting it right in, because that's just great. That's just great. A mini boss that is a half-completed primary construct. I'm with you. So we're going to talk antagonist construct. We haven't talked a lot about that character. We just kind of know that it exists, but we can also flesh that thing out. What's its name? What is it referred to? Antagonist construct. I don't think anyone realizes that that construct is as important as it is, including the other constructs. They all just report to Father Time, and Father Time reports to that construct, you know? And it's probably, you know, treats it like a butler, but really he's just being told what to do. Antagonist construct, humanoid, sentient, intends to break free from the tower once it has built a large enough force of automatons through manipulating Father Time. Great. There are several replicas of this construct throughout the clock tower. There are several replicas of this construct throughout the clock tower in lesser forms. A half-completed one serves as a powerful threat early on in the dungeon. Great. Sword to Coherency absorbs the mini drones and it affects how the main constructs behaves depending on what was summoned. Yeah, that could definitely be really cool. What else do we got? Bubonic One. Also, welcome, Bubonic One. Good to see you tonight. Talking about making a dungeon. I see. God, I miss being able to visit these chats. Well, we're always happy to have you when you can stop by. It is a joy to have everything, and I'm glad you're able to be here today. Welcome. Reflected 10.8, one hackable low-level construct to aid the party. I think a lot of them are hackable low-level constructs. I think every low-level construct is a little bit manipulatable, and if the players want to start out on that kind of like, we're just going to try and brazen our way through all of these low-level guys, I think there can be a lot of fun in them like convincing low-level constructs to join them, and then convincing low-level constructs to join them, and then once they get up to a point where they have a bunch of low-level constructs. This is actually a thing that happened very recently in DnDTime, in the adventure I ran last Friday, the first one, where they had a bunch of like little guys that they were just kind of messing around with, and once they got to a more significant guy, the higher level Modron was like, all of you guys are dumb, stop helping these people, turn around and attack. And then the friend's eyes turn red, essentially, and they all kind of swarm, because that's just like, that's very fun. It saves kind of an easy fight for the players that they probably wouldn't have to deal with. They feel kind of satisfied for getting past without conflict up to a point, and then shunning, getting through without conflict up to a point, and then they kind of like flip it around all of a sudden. So I think that's very cool. Hadnerfallen squeeze through a giant spring. Strength checks to bend it out of the way. The Modrons get furious at them, since their passing creates inaccuracies. I really like that. Like, everywhere they stepped inside, because I feel like there's a lot of robots that aren't going to be hostile to them because their functionality is not to attack. I feel like there's a lot of robots where anywhere they go, they're just going to be, anywhere they go, they are just going to be, just like fixing every tiny little thing they do. Anything they touch, like, they go over and just kind of like turn a random wheel, and there's another Modron that just steps up 2 seconds later and turns the wheel backwards, and then they turn the wheel again, and the Modron just turn. Just anytime they try and place it anywhere else, turns back. There's a lot of like cute little things you could start to do once you've got all of that kind of figured out. Bubonic One says, so I have a question. Does this tower have any adverse effects on the local time flow? Or is it, or is this tower somehow separated from reality? Bubonic One says, screwing with time equals really, really bad. I am with you on that front. Screwing with time is absolutely terrible. And the answer to that is, I don't know, should there be? We had talked about a cool thing that Maddie had given you, where the players had, like, while they were in the space, some odd control over time as well, but then, like, in doing so, it would kind of, like, you know, be used against them and kind of cripple them further down the road, which feels similar, and maybe there are some adverse effects outside of it as well. Who could say? Sebrak says there's a powerful magnet in the pendulum, and any metal-based melee weapons in hand are attached to the pendulum and require the generator 1 floor up to be turned off to retrieve them. There's a trap in front of the generator that triggers 3 automatons. I really like the idea of a magnet in the space, because that definitely fits in the construct category. I don't know if it's like a room, but anywhere within a magnet-based trap. I'll just call it a magnet. A trap somewhere in the dungeon. Excuse me. A trap somewhere in the dungeon that... I don't know. Trap that pulls the metal towards it. I just lost my brain for a second there. That pulls metal towards it. Players potentially fight without weapons or get dragged to it themselves if they are wearing armor. I also like the idea of, like, your paladin in heavy metal armor isn't necessarily pulled up to it because the magnet's not powerful enough to, like, make them fly in the sky. Otherwise, there would be no strength check. But I like the idea of a strength save, and they just kind of get dragged along the floor closer to it, and once they get, like, pulled off the platform, they just fall down because the magnet stops affecting them. That would be just a very funny kind of, a very funny idea. Hadner phone minutes. Oh, wait, it says, I saw up there, Sebrak, that I missed your thing again. I want to go back and find your... a boy from the village brings the old man cogs and other mechanical bits and bobs. If you catch him, he may give you information. For a price. I like it. Okay, where are we going to put it? We're going to put this in the... We're going to put this in the story category, because we don't have, like, a lot of the surrounding stuff. We're going to put this under where the party would encounter it, because maybe running into that boy would give them kind of an idea of how to enter, too. I think that's cool. Sorry I missed that a couple times, Sebrak. Hadnerphone, minutes. Why do the hours get all the credit? There's far more of you running the works, and they would get nowhere without you. I like the idea of... I really like the idea of him referring to, like, the lesser constructs as minutes, or even seconds. So what type of creatures for the Modrons? We can just say automatons within the dungeon are ranked by lengths of time. Basic Maintenance is left to the seconds. The space is guarded by minutes and overseen by the hours. Seconds, minutes, and hours. And then I think, like, once we get into days, weeks, months, and years, maybe there's like maybe there's like some generals or something that are like, oh, this is the year or something. I think there's a lot of cool stuff you can mess around with there, or the day, you know. Henderflon, yeah, name their hierarchy by time, hours, minutes, seconds, moments. Wait, we just had the same idea. That's great. But it was kind of inspired by what you said before with the minutes. Why do the hours get all the credit? I really like that idea. They're probably the prime is the day or dawn. They're currently prototyping Fortnite. I don't know the Fortnite reference, but that's very good. Does King Rudolph name all his construct after time-related things? Yeah, for sure he does. A price meaning like a whole silver? Thanks, mister. Yeah, Shiva, you're probably right about that. Just like, here, have a robot hand. Wow, this is made of gold. Thank you. Bubonic 1, well, how about a room where they meet themselves and they give themselves a hint? The info being useful now, but detrimental later. Meeting themselves in the dungeon is definitely a cool idea. And I think that would be a challenge to roleplay, but like the kind of challenge that I love. Let us see. Where do we want to put that? We're going to put that overall. Or is just like themselves. Whoa, I made a new tab. The heroes meet themselves from a short time in the future, giving strange guidance that may end up being detrimental. I like it. Farfel 13, this dungeon could come back to haunt them later in a campaign where some escaped Kronstucks create the year. Oh no! Terrifying. Well, then you have to have them meet their past selves later so they can say the same things to themselves or take psychic damage for ruining for ruining the continuum. That's... They say... I love that. If they don't say the same things you had them say later on, they shatter the continuum. That's fun. Time travel is a weird thing to play with, even in D&D, where there's... like, D&D is one of the harder mediums to do it right in, because there's the infinite variability. Like, in a video game, you can just kind of decide how it works, but in D&D, where your brain is the computer, you have, like, this instinct where you can make things so much crazier, and it ends up being wild. Repair log bot always follows the party but doesn't interact, just keeps notes. If they kill another, immediately takes its place. Having a lot of robots that are not necessarily enemies, but just like kind of fun, like little things like that, is I think a great idea for this dungeon. Repair log bot. And there's no world in which they destroy the repair log bot, because there's no way they're going to destroy their active kill counter while they're in the dungeon. Like, just... currently, 17 minutes need to be replaced, and 326 seconds are dysfunctional. Like, every player would love just having, like, just being able to turn back and just, oh, how many seconds did I just kill? Follows the players around, tracking damages. There's sentient pocket watches with legs that spy on the party like spiders. If you succeed in your observation check, the spider clocks will scatter in all directions, but if you fail, they will immediately run to the wizard, and he will be expecting you. Yeah, spy bots. I think that's definitely something that's reasonable. I don't know if they're actually, like... I don't know if we want to actually go the route of them just being sentient watches, because I think we want to keep it in the construct. Tiny... Oh, and they're watches. Obviously, they're watches, because that's the double meaning. I don't know if the pocket watch. I don't know if that's what you were going for, and if it was, then excellent job, Seabrak. You crushed it. Watches watch the players from a distance, reporting their movements to Father Time. I don't know, I think we're starting to get into a pretty cool place with this. There's some wild stuff here. I think there's, like, looking at all the stuff that we have, there are, like, two very clear directions I think you could take this clock, where you do, like, the full, I want to all in on the time stuff, or I want to all in on the robot stuff, and both of those would make cool dungeons, and I think this kind of meld that we have between the two of them also has a lot of potential. Before we're done, I want to take, well, one, I'm going to take a break, but two, I think we can... we finish up at around 11 o'clock. That's 40 minutes. I think in that time we could... I don't even think we need to answer that question. We could do a very quick second dungeon. We wouldn't be able to go into quite as much detail, but I think it's worthwhile going into a second dungeon, and I think at this point we have a pretty good idea of what we're going to do in this one, and I really like the direction it's at. So I'm going to take 5 minutes so I can run to the bathroom, and then we'll come back and do a second one. In the meantime, I'm going to just throw this back up here. Was there any more votes? Oh, there's more votes. And, oh, there's been a changing of the guard. I'll repost this here. This is how we picked constructs for the first one. So we're not going to do constructs again, obviously. But we'll do whatever one is in second place. So if you're interested in voting and you haven't already voted, go ahead and take a look at that. And then we'll come back and start, like, a second dungeon and see how far we can get on it in a little bit. So with that, I will be back in about 5 or so minutes. See you all very shortly. I knew I was muted. I realized it before I saw the thing. You know, sometimes you're gonna forget some things in this life, and that's one of them. So we have the thing here. We got some... thank you, Many More. I was just testing you. We got some things here. They're ideas for different things we can make dungeons out of. And I've refreshed the results here, and it looks like we are up to 5 votes for Fae and a tie at 5 votes for plants. And I don't think it's fair that Fae wins out because of alphabetical order. We got Fae and plants, both of things which I absolutely loved. Maddie Marks, we pass. Gotta make sure we're paying attention. Exactly. Thank you for understanding so well, Maddie. You understand perfectly as a fellow streamer. So, Fae and plants. When I think of the Feywild, one of the things that I think of most is nature. So I think that we can do a dungeon that heavily incorporates both Fae and plants. Those things, there's just so much synergy there. So I think we're going to do a double here in the final hour, and we're building this second dungeon on a clock. Get it? Get it? We're building it on a clock because we just did a clock. Farful13 says, so dryads. Yeah, dryads is a great. Oh wait, no, hold on a second. The second dungeon. Plants / Fae. The primary guardian or benefactor or quest giver of this adventure is a dryad. I think that a corrupted dryad would be a great place to go for this. Sacred Grove has become a twisting maze of entangled roots and vines and things like that, where there is at its core, a corrupted dryad in a terrible, withering tree. That seems like a very easy way to go with this, and I'm really into it. Seabrack, can I change my vote to plants? Unfortunately not. The die has been cast. The tie has been made. Sorry, I'll come back to it in a second, but that was a very good one, Headerphone. Seabrack, forest fairies, if D&D has those? Yeah. We don't have those. We have pixies, we have sprites, and anything's a forest fairy if it's a fairy and you put it in the forest. Reflected 10-8, could we have it be a faction-based dungeon with Fae versus plants trying to rule the dungeon? The answer is absolutely not, because next time we're going to do that exact same thing, but instead of Fae, it's going to be plants versus zombies, and we're going to have a plants versus zombies dungeon. No, we can do that for sure if you want. I kind of like it. Hadner Fallen says, RP exclusive dungeon. The dungeon is all bark and no bite. Hadner Fallen, I laughed in advance, so I can't laugh again now, but that was, as Reflected 10-8 pointed out immediately after, 10 out of 10. An extremely good joke. An extremely good joke. And maybe also, we could go in that direction if you wanted, but that'd be a weird dungeon with no combat. I don't know how fun a dungeon crawl would be without... It would just be weird, just like walking down a lot of halls. Just walking down a lot of halls talking to different people, and then keep walking. I guess you'd have to do a lot of puzzles. Skill challenges as well, I suppose. So, I like the idea, and I haven't heard anything counter to it yet. The primary layout of this dungeon is a hedge maze. How do you guys feel about that? I think that's something that could be really cool. A really elaborate and kind of like twisted hedge maze as our Fey Plant dungeon. And it doesn't necessarily have to be entirely hedges. I'm sure there's sections where there's like big, powerful, like corrupted treants that make for kind of points around intersections. And there are all sorts of other, you know, thorns, thorny kind of vines and things like that. The walls are formed of corrupted are reinforced with corrupted awakened trees, with awakened corrupted trees, and the hedges themselves are filled with thorns and prickles, making them near unclimbable. A creature that attempts to climb, to fly above the maze will be attacked by the walls themselves, which will bend inwards to swallow them up. And when you have the maze of plants, there's always the possibility that, you know, the walls can change, like segments of it can just kind of like collapse in on themselves. All of these things are pretty cool. Seabrack hedge maze with a frog pond in the middle. It is. At its center is a frog pond. I did an apostrophe for at it is center. Reflect innate full canopy or allow fly climb cheating. I think the vines, I think the vines have that thing where like I was just talking about, where they kind of swallow, but I like the idea of leaving it open on the top to make players think that they can cheese it by climbing up, even if they kind of beat the thorns in some way, and then have them kind of like be like, oh no, and it'll create a really dramatic situation where they've flown too high and now it's collapsing too quick, so they're actually like racing downwards, either letting themselves fall and taking a bunch of damage, or, you know, something else. Vessel's Age says it's enchanted. I like it. Hadner Fallen says if you want the two factions, maybe opt for Water Fae who are being overgrown. Yeah, I think that could be very cool. Poisonous vines with thorns. Yep, also very much into that. Have some charm affecting pollen above the hedges. Charming. The hedge maze dungeon. Yeah, so let's talk obstacles. And I think this dungeon is going to be one very big room, because that's what a maze is, kind of. And there'll be different sections, but, like, I think we can encounter at all times all kind of different stuff. So Black Sheep says, if the hedges are alive, then we can do shifting paths. I am 100% in agreement. That is one of the perfect uses. Shifting paths with living vines and thorn walls. Until the players realize the paths and walls are moving, the maze is infinite, as it shifts to put the players moving around in circles. the walls may forcibly split the players into multiple groups, breaking through and burning sections of the wall is difficult, but not impossible. And maybe that's the quotient for success is you have to like burn a part of the hedgerow for it to no longer move and for you to like have a real landmark, because otherwise like things like, for example, if they try and put like beans behind them or scratches in the ground, I picture like just a small vine kind of reaching out and pulling like the copper piece that they put down to mark their path and like dragging it into the vines. But huge long vines shoot out around the top, wrapping around the legs and dragging down those dang flyers. I was even thinking, I'd mentioned this before, but I was thinking, like, even before that, just the walls at the top just close in like a roof if they try to go up and, like, surround them with thorns. With enchanted moles that will attack them. Center is a frog pond. There are enchanted moles that will attack them. The maze also closes to protect wounded guardians and monsters that roam it. So I imagine there's like a lot of brutal tactics where a sudden wall will open and a band of like pixies and sprites will fly out and like fire, you know, evil pixies and sprouts or quicklings or whatever the thing that you put in the maze is. I will kind of come out and fire a bunch of arrows and volley with like that's kind of some of those guerrilla tactics we were talking about in the last talks. The players will... The players will like, you know, fight maybe... take a couple of them down, and then they'll just retreat back into the maze, and then it will just close up, and that's just, like, really devastating. Hadnerfallen. A king is riding around on an invisible horse, minor illusion, only sound, and asks them if they know where he can find a shrubbery. Oh, yes. Ah, yes. What a classic. Seabrack, underground tunnels big enough for halflings and dwarves to crawl through in case they want to split up, with enchanted moles that will attack them if encountered. I actually really like that idea. I'm sorry I keep missing. I feel like for some reason it just keeps ending up being you, Seabrack, where I'm missing chunks of what you're saying. Mole tunnels underneath, large enough for dwarves and halflings to fit through. A second kind of a second non-moving maze beneath the moving one above. And I think that's really interesting because then, like, if they end up going into some of these tunnels and finding some of those, then they have, like, a maze that they know is consistent because the ground's not moving. Only the plants and the roots and stuff are. Hadnerfallen, some of the floor is overgrown ponds. I like that. Some of the maze floor is made up of overgrown ponds. It's tiny but small, can squeeze through. It's changed to halflings and gnomes. Makes sense to me. For gnomes and halflings to fit through. And why would the players go here? Because it's encroaching. The maze was discovered in the forest one day by local townsfolk out lumbering or hunting in the woods. It has only grown since then, and seems to be on the verge of swallowing the town itself. And that sounds terrifying, and you can really build up the town where the maze like has a bunch of entrances on the outskirts of the town where it's kind of like trying to tempt people in. I bet you there's like, Lance was talking about charm effects before, you know, siren like charm effects and sweet scents drawing wanderers in. You know, if you dream nearby, like, you might end up finding, like, people are just, like, sleepwalking and walking in. Like, they have dreams of, like, the beautiful dryad kind of within the center of the maze. That's kind of, like, calling them and trying to lull them into it, drawing them to whatever doom that she is drawing them towards. I guess it could also be a he. I always kind of internally engender dryads to female, but it could be of any gender, I suppose. And... you know, the dryads are kind of like pulling people into the maze, and when they encounter the maze, the citizens talk about how it used to just be at a strange place in the forest, and it just kind of appeared one day, and now it's like on the outskirts of the town, and people are constantly like burning and cutting it down as it's like encroaching at a rapid pace. I think that's a really cool aesthetic. The corruption is causing plants to become fey and to become carnivorous. Yeah, for sure. As and this is more in the category, as the maze grows and expands, so does its connection to the Feywild. The maze's center has become a full-scale Fey crossing, and players that enter the maze and exit may find that they exit into the Feywild itself. I think that's really cool. Blink dogs, yeth hounds. The corruption is causing the plants Fey to become carnivorous. Need some Last of Us plant zombies. Oh yeah, Vigipygmies and Thornies. They're made from humans' remains after all. So plants and Fey. Let's start talking bold. Boop. Vigipygmies. I don't know if that's how you spell it. I don't know what a Thorny is actually. Thornies. Vigipygmies, Thornies, awakened trees, treants, blights. Every blight would work in this. I liked yeth hounds, someone mentioned. Sentient moles. That was one of them. Giant frogs / toads. All of these kind of things would work really cool. Can we have gnomes? You've been gnomed. You've been gnomed! We were doing Fey, right? Yeah, we can have some gnomes, maybe. Like garden gnomes. Yeah, that'd be very cute. Sentient living garden gnomes. Sure, we can throw it on the list. Gnomes! The Dryad should be a warlock of the Archfey of Decay and Corruption, Zagutmoy. I don't never know how to enunciate it. Blink dogs. Blink dogs that are able to easily navigate the maze by cheating and jumping past hedges. That is, oh man, them making friend with a wild blink dog and then having that be the path. Blink dogs that are neutral towards the players, that may act as guides by teleporting in the right directions and then barking. Like, that seems really cool. Because getting past the moving shrubs, I think, is the main challenge of this kind of encounter. Unicorn being attacked if you don't save it. Yeah, it corrupts into a bicorn. We can do a unicorn for sure. Unicorn. In parentheses. Under attack. Another potential ally. This is cool, and I like this because this is like, the last one was very segmented, where there's a lot of different things you could put into this. This one has a lot more flow to it, where it's just a lot of like wandering down the corridor, seeing what's happening, getting the general vibe of the maze on the whole, and then once they get closer, there's kind of, they make it down to an inner chamber where the Dryad lies. Someone mentioned a thing about the Dryad being an Archfey. Where is the stuff about the Dryad that we have? Dryad being an Druid of the Archfey, or Warlock of the Archfey. Stat block. I think that was Lance. Could use the Warlock of the Archfey. With corruption and decay based spells. Corruption with an O. And I think that could be very rad. Maybe you could use, I wasn't crazy about it, but maybe you could also make a druid with from the new Druid of the Spores, might be in that category. Mushroom people and myconids are probably something that could be considered there. Mushroom people. Myconids, hags, a witch in the maze, I think could also work pretty well. A green hag specifically feels pretty right. Hednerfallen says unicorns are considered celestials. Yeah, that's absolutely true. That is absolutely true. Farfel Thornies are Vegapygmy mounts. Oh! Seabrack, there's a chance of the party or a single player encountering a unicorn that can bless you with a temporary armor boost. If you present it in offering, present the wrong thing and it will alert the pixies to your presence and disappear. Unicorns, yeah, unicorns are celestials, but I think a unicorn in a mystical place like that isn't out of the question. I don't think it's completely ridiculous. I can see it for sure. Scratch that. I don't know if unicorns have magic powers in D&D. They probably don't. No, they definitely do. They have a lot of cool magic powers. Yeah, I kind of like this direction. I think that's a pretty... we did a pretty good job building this out quick. I'm impressed with y'all, as I always end up being. But I think y'all crushed it, as you usually do. In particular, like, I like both of these dungeons, but this one, I can see running this, like, almost immediately. The Clockwork one seems like one that you'd have to, like... put a little more effort into like fitting into your game, but this one I can just see running this almost like tomorrow, you know, if I needed to run a dungeon really quick. Very, very simple, a ton of stuff that you can pull on for creatures from it, from the Fey things, just having random encounters as they walk down different paths, having little openings with intricate terrain where it's still just, you know, battles and things of that nature, but you can vary the terrain by what type of plants are in the area. You know, there was the mention of maybe that one point, you know, the plants can't just grow up into a pond, and they have to a certain extent, kind of grow around it, maybe. So having like an underwater section, you know, maybe there's a naiad that is in the underwater section that like tells you a little bit about the nature of the dungeon. I think there's a lot of ways that we could expand this, and I think like just like we spent all that time on the clock tower, I think we could probably have taken a whole worlds for that, and I think we also could have taken a whole world for this hedge maze dungeon. But I think both of these are cool aesthetics. I really like the kind of vibes that we went, because when I think dungeon, and I should have known that, knowing you guys, that we wouldn't end up with like a very run-of-the-mill dungeon, but when I think dungeon and was thinking this, I was like, oh, we'll probably end up doing like a temple of some sort, or a ruin, or a literal dungeon, or an abandoned mine. I should have known that we'd end up with a clock tower and a hedge maze, which are both just, I think, awesome aesthetics. So I don't know, I had a lot of fun building these dungeons with y'all tonight, as I do every time. And as you could probably tell, I think it's about time that we wrap things up. So for starters, I would like to say thank you all so very much for hanging out with us and for building dungeons with us. Like I was just saying, and I will just reiterate it once more, I am always impressed by the amount of creativity that comes out from y'all. You are crushing it consistently 24/7, 300 hours a day, 400 days a week. So much love, and thank you for all of the ideas and all of the great stuff that you guys are putting out in chat. Secondly, tune in to the other shows that DnDTime does. Tune in tomorrow to DnDTime Talks, where we are going to be doing something. Tomorrow we are talking about experience, which will be an interesting discussion. We'll be talking about regular experience, milestone experience, kind of how to go about rewarding it, when to level up, just talking about leveling up on the whole. There's a lot of different stuff that you can, a lot of different stuff that I think is more than meets the eye when it comes to a rewarding experience. So that's what we'll be getting into tomorrow, and that is at 9:30 Eastern Standard Time, 6:30 Pacific Standard Time, or I guess it could also be 8:30 Central or 7:30 Mountain, all depending on where you are, or if you're in a different time zone than those four. I don't know the details of your time zones, but keep in mind that things are funky because of daylight savings time, so if you're not down on daylight savings time and don't use that, just remember that we do here in America. Great job, America, on that one. Also, tune in to, of course, Pete and Jeremy's D&D Time on Friday, where we're going to be talking about some, well, what am I talking about? I almost said talking about stuff. We're going to be running games. Pete and Jeremy's D&D Time, it's a show where we run one-shots with our community. If you've never played in Pete and Jeremy's D&D Time, by the way, guys, come hang out. It's very fun. We run goofy, just really goofy in tone adventures. They're like an hour to an hour and a half long, so it's low commitment. There are still time to sign up if you are interested, and all the information about how you can do that is linked underneath here on chat. So please do. We'd love always to see you guys on and playing with us there. And last but not least, I would like to say one last thank you. Oh wait, no, there's also Brews. I forgot about Brews. Tune into Brews on Sunday, 9 Eastern, just like D&D Time is 9 Eastern, and we're going to be talking about some, actually, I don't know if what Jeremy put down on Brews in the announcements, so if he didn't put anything, I won't say it now because I don't want to spoil it, but we're talking about some cool stuff in Brews on Sunday. One thing that I am in particularly passionate about, and also one that I know everyone's going to be very excited to take a stab at, brewing a completely new type of thing that we've never tried before. So, well, Sheba said we've already talked about it. So we're going to be talking some brainstorming for a new class, and then something else. I don't know if you mentioned the other thing. Sheba will probably spoil that now as well, because if it's already spoiled, it does not matter. But if that's not there, then I won't mention that, because that's something I am very excited about as well. So I am going to... Yep, there it is, 200-word RPG challenge as well. I am really excited about the 200-word RPG challenge. It is a really cool online thing. I don't know if people have already looked into it since we talked about it. I might also just talk about that next time on Worlds, just talk about some of my own things that I've already created for that, and just discuss it, because, like I said, I am really into this thing. It's a really cool... it's a really cool program where basically it is an annual contest where they challenge people to design full RPG games, role-playing games, using 200 words or less. There's some incredible creativity that has poured out of that game. We're going to talk about it more on Sunday, and I'll gush about how much I like this program. And like I said, I've already designed like a bunch of RPGs for it just because when I found out about it, I was just inspired. So we'll talk about that more on Sunday when we're doing Brews, but I'm really excited about that. So I've rambled a little bit enough here at the end. Thank you again so much for tuning in. It is always a joy hanging out with you. I love you all very much. And that's it. I'm Pete, and this was DnDTime Worlds. I almost said the wrong thing. This is DnDTime Worlds. Good night, everybody. Good night. Also, I don't know if Maddie is streaming tonight. I don't think he usually streams on Tuesdays, but... Oh, wait, no, he definitely does. Maddie's definitely streaming tonight. What am I talking about? I don't know. Tune into Maddie Morgs. If he's streaming, we'll be hosting him on this channel. Maddie is streaming. Maddie, please help me. Please help me and tell me. Yep, that's what I thought. Yeah, it's the ongoing campaign tonight. I always get confused after Worlds because I don't do Worlds every week. Tune in to Maddie. We'll be hosting him on this channel, so if you just hang out here for a while, eventually Maddie will be on, and it's a lot of fun to watch over there. So tune in to Maddie as well. This is DnDTime Worlds. Thanks for watching. Good night, everybody. Good night. No, no!